My name is Philip Lotspeich. As we get going, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am the coordinator for church growth in Louisville. I work for the General Assembly Council, which I'm finding out is one of like 5 or 6 entities down in Louisville. You know, when I was a pastor, I guess I still am a pastor, but when I was working in the church, you know, when you talk about General Assembly, you know, it was just kind of all was lumped into it. Now that I'm working there, I understand there are like 5 different ones. There's the General Assembly Council, there's Office of General Assembly, there's the Board of Pensions, there's the foundation, all this other stuff. So I'm a little more sensitive now when somebody talks about the General Assembly. You know, okay, well, which part is that? Is that the, you know, because I want to know if we screwed up or if somebody else screwed up. You didn't get that on tape, did you? Okay. Anyway, basically, I've been in this job. I started February 4th working. I was a new church development pastor prior to that in Frisco, Texas. I started a church called Faith Bridge Presbyterian Church. It was about 9 years old. Left there very, very reluctantly to come to Louisville. I loved my time as a new church development pastor. It was one of the times that I've grown more than, I mean, in terms of, you know, spiritual maturity and pastoral maturity and theological maturity. I mean, I can't, you know, it was just exponential because a lot of the stuff that I learned in seminary was not useful for me in new church development. So I had to learn a lot. And I'm sure you guys that are doing new churches are having to learn a lot as you go. And kind of it's a pretty steep learning curve when you hop into a new church and start to plan it. Even if you're working from a denominational level or a judicatory level, there's a real steep learning curve. My job in Louisville entails 2 basic sides. I work with new church developments, like you guys, and judicatories mainly, doing new church development, but I also work with congregational transformation. And so that means I've got kind of both sides of the equation, as if you look at it, the kind of birthing of churches and the helping of churches try to transform and become something more, or, you know, kind of reach their full kingdom potential, so to speak. And so as I look at the number of churches that I get to kind of oversee and deal with, it's about 11,000. So we work mostly with presbyteries because 173 is a lot more workable than 11,000. So we do a lot of what we do in presbyteries. Kind of the first things first. A lot of times when we start to start new churches, we run out and we're excited about what we're going to do. Either a presbytery has approached us to start a new church, or you're from a presbytery and you're thinking we'd like to start a new church because there's a lot of growth somewhere. You've looked at demographics or you've looked at a certain kind of people population, and we want to run out and start a church. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of start from scratch. And we're going to talk a little bit about who Jesus is. And that's important because one of the things we're finding is as we see new churches get off the ground and they get 2 or 3 years in, even 4 years in, if they haven't really discussed some of the foundational issues about who Jesus is, what is the church, what is salvation, what is mission, all that kind of stuff, that when they get 2 or 3 years in, you have different kind of understandings of who Jesus is that start to creep up, and fractures can occur in the church. And it's just a good way to start, I think. I think it's pretty good to be able to start talking about who Jesus is and what he means to us, especially in your teams. And my hope was that your team would be here. If not, if you don't have your team in here to talk with you about these issues, make sure you take it back to your team and have that conversation. Presbyterians are notorious about being heady and theological about things, and sometimes we need to be a little more kind of heart-focused and really kind of ask ourselves, okay, who is Jesus for me? And who do I expect, you know, Jesus is that we're giving Jesus to people, right? I mean, I'm going to sound really evangelical here, aren't I? We're going to give Jesus. I gotta get about 4 syllables in there. I'm going to work on that. But, you know, you're as a new church development pastor, a team, an elder, or a judicatory person, you're sharing something very powerful with people. And it's important that you know who what that is for you and who that is for you. So how we're going to start this today is we're going to ask some questions, and we're going to start with Matthew 16, 13 through 25. If you have your Bible, you can open it up. I used to tease my congregation. I'd say if you have your Bible, open up, and they would just look at me. I'm like, okay, well, we're a good Presbyterian. Occasionally we'd have a Baptist come, and she'd pull out her Bible and open it up and beat everybody to the punch. So for Matthew 16, it says, "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' And Simon Peter answered, 'You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God.' And Jesus answered him, 'Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But he turned to Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. And then Jesus told his disciples, If any of you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Hopefully there's somebody in your area that has a Bible and can share with you. As you listen to me read it, what are some of the phrases that jumped out at you? What things that maybe you hadn't heard before or hadn't thought about before that kind of jumped out and said, hey, this is important? Any?
The who do you say I am jumped out, because that's the question on the screen.
Yeah, it is. Who is Jesus? Who do you say that I am? I find it interesting that Jesus kind of turns it around. He kind of wades them in and says, who do other people say? You know? Kind of takes them easy. I mean, doesn't put it to them very quickly. And they start to postulate, oh, you're this person, you're that person. And then he kind of turns it personal. Because sometimes we're really good at talking about who other people say Jesus is. But when it comes to actually articulating it for ourselves, it becomes very much more difficult. Others, what other things jumped out at you that you saw?
He makes them figure it out. He doesn't tell them who he is. They have to work it.
Very interesting. I mean, he actually wants us to use our minds and our hearts. Come on, just tell me. You know, wouldn't that be easier? Just tell me. I don't want to go through this. I mean, how many people in our world, especially as we go out and practice the great art of evangelism, just want to be told who Jesus is, instead of to help someone kind of coach them along and draw it out of themselves. So the key question here then is, who is Jesus for you? Take a moment and turn in your little groups here if you can. If I know the tables may not be the easiest thing, but answer that question. And I'm going to ask you to do it in a different way. I don't want you to do it in a theological way, because that's the easy way. That's the easy way to talk about. But I mean, for you and in your journey of faith, who is Jesus? Okay, talk amongst yourselves. So how was that? What's the experience like having to kind of talk about who you say Jesus is? Say it out loud so everybody can hear. Kind of easy? I like that. Was it easy, difficult? Did it take a while to get into it? I may be preaching to the choir, because if you're NCD people, you better be used to sharing Jesus with people. My sense is that in most of our churches, that's a much more difficult task. I remember when I would have elder training, and I'd say, tell me about your spiritual journey. Tell me about how you came to faith. And invariably they would start saying, well, I grew up in this church, and then I moved to this church, and I moved to this church. And I'm like, I don't care what churches you've been involved in. Tell me about your relationship with this person we call the Christ. And it becomes very personal. It becomes very difficult for them. But it's so very important that we do this, because as we talk about today, and we're talking about the ABCs, we're talking about assessment, we're talking about what's beyond that, it's absolutely vital that we understand who Jesus is and how it impacts our church, so that we can do some of this future assessment, that foundational agreement. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to agree on every single thing that everybody thinks. That's not what we're saying. But there has to be some sense of who this Jesus is.